it still says okay.
Sorry. Get myself together.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Well, okay. So it says recording on your end.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Good. Well, first, thanks for agreeing to be interviewed. So
Sure.
this is Kate Fry here, and if you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Today we have John Parker, who is running for the U.S. Senate for the Freedom Socialist Party in California, L.A., Los Angeles, and you're a founder and chief organizer of the Harriet Tubman Social Justice Center, as I understand.
Yes.
And you're also a leading member of the Socialist Unity Party.
Yeah.
Okay, great, cool, cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, as I understand, they're a relatively new organization. They're split from Workers' World.
Yes. I
Okay,
think we
okay,
started in 2019 or 18.
okay,
18.
interesting, cool. Now, what got my now a whole bunch of things to talk about. What got my attention? You were in Donbass, I believe, it was in March. You
Mhm.
visited Donbass, and there's very little information from the mainstream corporate media on Donbass, or like CNN journalists on Kiev or the border of Poland, Lviv, or whatever. So there are a small handful of American journalists who are doing some really interesting work, but there's very little reporting on what's happening there. You were actually there, and you had a webinar with Margaret Kimberly from Black Agenda Report, which is interesting. I saw it this morning, and by the way, I'll provide links. The website of your organization is La Lucha Struggle, and you have a variety of videos about your explaining your. Well, so first, what could you share? What is your impression of the situation in
Yeah.
Donbass right now?
Yeah. The our publication is Struggle La Lucha.
Okay,
Dot
Struggle La Lucha. Sorry.
Struggle La Lucha. Kind of a repeat of the same word, but
Sure.
um, uh, so yeah. So we wanted to go to Ukraine to kind of to get some more evidence about what we pretty much already knew, but to convince the anti-war movement, especially here, about the actual existence of the Nazis and fascist forces that are growing almost exponentially in Ukraine, and also the some of the targeting of civilians by the Ukrainian military. Um, so at first I went to Russia and then into Donbass, the region, and to the Lugansk People's Republic in
Okay.
Donbass. And those are, two republics that were started in response to the wave of reaction since 2014 with the billions of dollars that the U.S. had put in regime change, and replacing the democratically elected government in 2014 for this government which was promoting Nazis for and putting up statues and museums of folks who collaborated with the World War II Nazis. And so the regions of Donbass decided that they didn't want to have any part of that, and they wanted to become independent republics of the Lugansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic.
Okay.
Um, mhm.
Now, was there? It seems like there was a lot of nostalgia for the Soviet Union. They call themselves People's Republics, and as I understand, communist parties originally were in the leadership of the two People's Republics, but they were pushed out of leadership. Is that true, or what's the
Yeah,
situation there?
yeah, it's and it kind of reflected what I saw in Russia as well. Even though Russia became a capitalist country,
Oh,
the people there, you go and you look at the storefronts, you see the hammer and sickle in the stores and things, and it was pretty nice actually. And that kind of was repeated I saw in Lugansk.
okay.
Um, you see lots of red flags, hammers and sickles, and the people are not ashamed of their history. In fact, there's lots of monuments to the heroes who fought during World War II, the patriotic war, to stop the fascists. So that's definitely something that is they're proud of.
Interesting. Yeah, I see a lot of Soviet flags or Soviet battle flags, watching some videos. Anyway, there's a guy, American Patrick Lancaster, who's been doing some amazing photojournalism. And his recent bombing of Donetsk, the city of Donetsk, like civilian infrastructure, residential areas, and civilian workers. How did the civilians feel in Lugansk, in that region?
Yeah.
Pretty upset, or what was the feeling?
Yeah, we especially saw that in when we went to the shelters, and we were going to these shelters that were very close to the front lines. I mean, you could hear it. You can hear the blasts of the firings and the shellings and things. And you could also see a lot of the apartment buildings in the area where the shelters were located, with many shells, holes in them, and abandoned. In fact, the shelter we went to in Rubizny, if I'm pronouncing that right, probably not. That was filled with that had been 350 people had been there from the surrounding area, and they had left their apartment buildings because they were escaping from, believe it or not, tanks being fired into their apartment buildings. And so they went there for to save their lives and their lives of their children. And I was trying to figure out how to share the screen, but I couldn't figure it out. And there's lots of videos we have of the peoples in the shelter talking about the fact that they were being attacked by the Ukrainian military, and even having conversations, yelling at the military, saying, "Why are you doing this? There's no Russians here or anything. Why are you bombing?" And this one person talked about how they were uh, they were Russian and their neighbors were Ukrainian in the area, and she was saying, "Why are you bombing? They're Ukrainians. Why are you bombing?" And 20 minutes later, the tank comes by to her house and bombs her house with the tank. So a lot of the people there were, instead of being afraid of the Russian soldiers that were there, and the soldiers came there after February 22nd. Before that, they were just advisors, and the Lugansk People's Militia was the grouping that was protecting the region. And I know in the West, they try to say that the Russians were there, or the soldiers were there all this time. It was really just the Russians and not the Lugansk peoples. But that's according to what I saw, according to what the Lugansk People's Militia are saying, and the people in Lugansk are saying that they came on February 22nd. Before that, there were some advisors. But the people in the shelters were talking about how they felt safe now that the Russian soldiers were there. And I specifically asked them how they would feel if the soldiers had left. And they said, we'd be destroyed. We wouldn't feel safe. So it's a totally different reality that you're seeing over there than you're hearing over in the United States.
Right. Would you say it's accurate to say that the people in that region look on the Russians as liberators?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's right now. It's the defense of the Donbass regions. It's a partnership between the Russian soldiers and the Lugansk folks, and it's something that they often don't talk about. The fact that the people in the Donbass regions begged for and pleaded for the help of the Russians to come in before February 22nd, because when the Ukrainian military was amassed on their borders, ready to commit a humanitarian crisis and genocide, which was similar to the past 8 years from 2014, which is something else the West doesn't talk about. They had been at war, been bombed, tortured, raped, terrorized for 8 years. And when the Ukrainian military was on February 22nd, was ready to go, they were ready to finish the job. So it was going to be a genocidal humanitarian crisis, and that's why those people asked for help. And it's kind of hard to understand why the anti-war movement here doesn't doesn't sympathize or empathize with the folks who were just trying to survive, and that's why they asked for help.
Right.
And any of us would, if our children were being threatened by a force of, especially a fascist force, uh, you'd want help from anywhere, anywhere you can get it. And so the Russians were coming in response to the request for help, and in response to stop a genocidal nightmare that was going on, what was about to happen. So yes, they definitely see them as a partner in fighting off these fascist forces.
Right. So interesting. The American media gives such a, like CNN, NPR, Fox, gives such a distorted view. Literally everything they say about this is a lie. And they say, people. I live in Portland, Maine, or near Portland, Maine, and like one area, like there are at least 4 or 5 Ukrainian flags on every block. Like people mean well, but they don't understand what's going on. The media gives such a distorted message. How do you briefly? How would you explain to people, Americans, like who mean well, but like what's really going on? How did it come to this situation right now?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
under. Sorry, go.
Oh, I was saying the narrative's like Madman Putin is in a irrational land grab, and that's kind of the narrative.
Yeah, and it's understandable why people want to help. People are when they think when they think innocent people are being attacked and things, people want to be good and do the right thing, and but they should remember though, um, who's telling them these things. And the New York Times is called the newspaper of record. And if we just trace what the New York Times had said in the past, you could start with the Lusitania in 1915, and how the New York Times was used to get the U.S. to get into World War One. Are the Gulf of Tonkin incidents, where you'd see these headlines. I'm picking on the New York Times, but you could say the same thing about all the other major media too. But they had headlines saying, out and out lies about the U.S. being attacked and by the Vietnamese, and that was able to get the U.S. into attacking Vietnam, and 2 million Vietnamese people that died later, and 500,000 who were permanently maimed from Agent Orange because of those lies. And then the truth comes out, and it even comes out in the same newspapers where they admit, well, we had bad information, and especially that was the case in weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, where the headlines were about the chemical weapons. Almost every week or so, you'd see these major headlines about what the Iraqis were doing, and the weapons that they possessed, and all these things. And the New York Times actually published an apology where they said, well, it was just a breakdown in our verification process. But yeah, which meant that 500,000 children were killed because of their verification process problems. And then they repeat the things over and over again. So people, when they see this so-called evidence from the major media, even the newspapers of record, they should think to themselves, they've lied to me in the past, so maybe they're lying again. And which is why one of the ways you have to defeat lies is you have to challenge the credibility of the person who's lying, and but sometimes you have to also go to those places that they're talking about, because they rely on that. Not many people can go to the Donbass region and see for themselves, so they rely on this. And these reports are coming from specifically this newspaper called the media outlet called the Kiev Independent. And that Kiev Independent was founded with money from the National Endowment for Democracy and the European Endowment for Democracy. The staff were all had their careers buoyed by NATO, CIA money. So that's the information, and they get their information from their close partnership with the Azov Battalion, which is the fascist neo-Nazi or Nazi battalion who are unafraid, unapologetic about being Nazis, and they are an official part of the military in the Ukraine, and that's where they're getting their videos and their information, and then they send those over to CNN and New York Times, Washington Post, and they accept them as if it's real truth. So we're getting Nazi propaganda as truth in this country, and so it's not surprising that people are seeing this. But it's really a shame that a lot of forces in the anti-war movement aren't being a little more objective and serious about about the information they're getting and verifying it.
Right. What type of dog do you have? I have two little dogs here. What kind of dog do you have?
Sorry, I'm trying to get.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
There, I always loved shepherds,
Okay.
but
Cool.
this time we got our neighbor had a litter of shepherds and mixed with husky, so they're
Okay.
not as disciplined.
Yeah,
that
that's
husky
okay. Yeah,
puppies.
I have two little dogs, Shih Tzus. They're
Uh,
like that. They're really needy, wonderful dogs, but really needy and hyper. Anyway, back to Ukraine. There's a narrative on the left. I disagree with this, but a very common narrative on parts of the left that we shouldn't take a side on this, that both Russia and the US are capitalist, imperialist countries. And I disagree with this, but what would be your take on that?
yeah, well, I guess it's a function of not kind of understanding the science of what is imperialist.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could just say anybody who acts mean is an imperialist or something like that. But the actual, I'm sure as you know, the actual definition of what an imperialist is in terms of the science of society, that they have to meet certain standards. They have to be you look at their trade. If all their trading is raw materials and they're not trading capital goods, they're not putting railroads in another country and then using that capital to exploit exploit value and exploit and get wealth from that. That's what an imperialist does. They use capital. Russia exports raw materials only. Russia's GDP is about the size of South Korea and India. Their technological development is, in terms of production, isn't as advanced as it is in Western Europe and the United States. So that means when they trade, they are always losing in their trade because their productive things aren't as efficient. So it's not the same relationship. The Russians are tall, big people, but the imperialists in terms of power and economic might are like Goliath compared to Russia. And it's why, even though they had a counter-revolution and they're capitalists right now, but they are not allowed a seat at the table with the other imperialists. And that's why they act in the interest of the other targets of U.S. imperialism, like Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela and other countries, because it's in their interest to be unified with those forces who are also being attacked economically and militarily by the United States.
Right, interesting. And people say, kind of obviously a proxy war between the US and Russia, but it's also a proxy war between US imperialism and the global South to some extent. Would you say this is accurate? Like, I have a theory, like there's an activist in New York City, Danny Shaw, I believe he's in the PSL. He mentioned he went to Nicaragua recently for a conference, and an RT presenter was there, and there were there were leftists from all over Latin America. And when the RT presenter got up, there were wild cheers, like people were shouting, Putin, Putin. It didn't reflect, he said, like support for Putin per se, but support for Russia fighting back against U.S. imperialism.
Yeah, yeah, it's good that it is changing a little bit, because at first you couldn't say anything objective about the situation. Or you call it a proxy war. Um, I know many folks that are even in the own and the people that I was working with during my campaign. Some of them were saying, "Oh, you're just repeating Putin's stuff. You're just
Who
Putin's lapdog or whatever." And it's all about,
why?
that's the way it always is when they vilify it. It doesn't make any real sense. They just say brutal dictator, Saddam
Right.
Hussein, Gaddafi. They're all just any target, latest target, people that didn't know anything about them a week ago. But when the U.S. decides to target a country, they target their leader and they vilify them, and it's all over the press, and all of a sudden everybody's repeating the same thing about a brutal dictator. But a brutal dictator, if you could consider what Biden is doing in Afghanistan right now by holding off the assets, freezing the assets in Afghanistan. $9.5 billion are freezing, and the United Nations has said that this is going to cause the starvation of 1 million people. So 1 million people are going to die. Putin, Biden, all he has to do is snap his fingers and say, and right now he could just say, okay, we'll unfreeze your assets, and now we're going to allow 1 million people not to starve to death. So, you tell me who the monster really is.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. U.S. imperialism is drenched in an ocean of blood. Yeah, absolutely. Pivoting slightly, you were running as a socialist. How do you explain socialism to people? Like whenever I live in Maine and I used to live in Vermont. So when I mention like I'm a socialist, people say, "Oh, Bernie Sanders," and their eyes light up. "Oh, democratic socialism." Like, how do you explain what socialism is really all about?
Yeah, and it's a good time to talk about that too now, because
Yeah.
now so many people are interested. From our campaign, we're seeing so many people, young people especially, are very interested in an alternative to this system, and they know that capital. We don't. You don't really have to argue about capitalism being bad anymore. It's
Good
so
point.
apparent from how the U.S. allowed 1 million people to die of COVID needlessly because of their reliance on the market rather than centralizing and people's needs and things like that. But I guess I kind of just say socialism is, and it really shows the difference between what Bernie Sanders and others are saying about what socialism is that when you go to work, you go and you create value from your work. Your labor creates value, which turns into profits, which turns into the wealth of the nation. So working people are the ones who create the wealth, and the main contradiction in society is that although we create the wealth, we don't control the wealth, and just a very small minority of people control the wealth and decide things like Jeff Bezos can go up. He decided to spend billions of dollars to have a rocket ship go up and down in space as a joyride. And I don't even
Yeah.
think he went up in space. He just went up to the upper atmosphere. uh, Now, and it was interesting that he said um, he admitted that the Amazon workers had made this happen, made this possible. It's
Right.
most true.
Right. He even admitted it. Right.
But so the Amazon workers made all that wealth to make that happen, but they didn't have a decision because I'm sure the Amazon workers would have probably said, especially the parents that are Amazon workers, would have probably said, "Well, I'd rather spend those billions on a baby formula factory since we have a shortage in the richest country of the world of
That's
baby formula." They probably would have said, "I'd rather spend the money on that rather than spend it on your little joyride." But they don't control the wealth. So what a true socialist is trying to do is working towards stopping that contradiction, and where the working people will control the wealth that they create, and they'll make the decisions for people's needs and not for the profits of a very small minority that owns the financial and industrial wealth in this country.
right. Right. Yeah. As I understand, Los Angeles now is a huge homeless problem. I've actually never been there, but I've seen videos of it, many photos and videos of it. There are huge whole areas where like homeless encampments. It's like,
Hmm.
it's horrific. Um, who are your main opponents? Who I should know this, but who is running in Los Angeles for the Senate? Who are you up against?
Oh yeah. Well, the the race ended on the
Oh, no. Okay. Sorry.
um, the My dog wants to talk.
That's okay.
Um, the election was on the 7th, on June 7th. But
Okay.
the results are going to be coming in for another 25 or 26 days. It's because a lot of the mail-in ballots and things. So the results are coming in. But the main person who was running Democratic Party was Alex Padilla.
Okay.
And he had gotten the position when Kamala Harris left to become vice president and things. So, there's contradictions that he has. He says he's for health care, but he reneged on a lot of the promises for universal health care and he's a typical Democratic politician. And then there's a bunch of other Republican politicians, but he received about 3 million something, over 3 million votes. The next person, Republican, got about 900,000 votes, I think it was. And these votes really reflect the amount of money, the millions of dollars that they get to run from those ruling class forces, the industrial and financial monopolies that run this country. They supply the money for the politicians to be able to be visible in every household, because that's really what it takes. You need money to the advertisements, the billboards, all of these kinds of things, and that's how they keep grassroots candidates from being able to, even for people even being able to know they exist. But I think so these other candidates, and there were 23 candidates and maybe about 18 or so Democratic and Republican candidates who had a lot of money, but not the money that Padilla had. He was the choice of the Democratic Party mainly. But I'd say they'd probably spend about 100,000 for their campaigns. I spent about a little less than 5,000, and I got so far 97,000 votes. And by the time it's over, we'll probably have about 100,000 votes. And this is about 5 times more than we received in the last time I ran in 2018.
Okay.
And this was we were talking about the Ukraine crisis, and we were talking about the fact that this was a proxy war, and this was a reflection. This was the expansion of NATO. This was another step in the expansion of NATO, and we talked honestly with the people, and it didn't hurt.
Yeah.
And we talked about socialism, and it didn't hurt.
Well, you found people were pretty responsive to your message.
Very responsive. I got more. I mistakenly put my phone number on. Everybody's allowed to have a message on their ballot, on the ballot, although it costs $25 per word. Isn't that democracy? So if you have a lot of money, you can have a whole page statement. If you don't, like me, I had a couple paragraphs. But I mistakenly put my real phone number in there. Otherwise I would use the office phone number, but I used my own personal phone number. So I was getting a lot of calls, and I took them, and the most things were positive, and the negative was not about the Ukraine, but the negative are even really socialism. The negative was about folks who were against the vaccines and against the vaccine mandates, and so that was mainly, but definitely people wanted to hear. And when they said, oh, well, I saw what you said about the Ukraine, and I looked it up, and I started reading some of the articles you wrote and others, and they said, yeah, it makes sense what you're saying. So that's just to say, we just have to keep putting the truth out there, and people will pick up on it.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I have noticed there are a fair number of people on the right or populist right who are anti-imperialist in their own way. They call it anti-globalism, but they're very critical of the U.S. role in NATO and in Ukraine. So there's some common ground to talk with some of these people. I've kind of noticed that.
Yeah, it's kind of sometimes sometimes in a way it makes it a little harder, because people are saying, "Why, you're agreeing with some folks on Fox News, so you must be wrong."
Yeah. So yeah.
But so I always use the thing about what the clock is always, it's the clock that's broken is right 2 times a day or something like that. But we also have to see that these right-wing forces that might be saying slightly the right thing about the Ukraine crisis right now, are also still saying that they support white supremacy and that they support fascism.
Right.
And that's the big problem. And that's the big problem here because they're saying that there is no there is no fascist problem. I mean, Zelensky is Jewish, so the president of Ukraine is Jewish, so there can't be any fascist problem. But you know, President former President Obama was a black man. In fact, his father was from, I think, Kenya, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but he was responsible for almost the bringing back of colonialism almost in Africa by allowing AFRICOM to get so much deeper into Africa and the drone program. So he allowed the military weapons to be used in black communities to shoot down black children. So I think the ruling class understands now how to use oppressors against the oppressed. How to use the oppressed against the oppressed by using their face to get those reactionary policies through. It's an effective way of doing things, but the fact is that Zelensky has surrounded himself with fascist forces. He's appointed mayors and governors as fascists, even the governor of Odessa, where the trade unionists were burnt alive by fascist forces in 2014. And the military, we talked to folks in the shelters who were saying, not the shelters, I'm sorry, and shoot, it starts Krimskaya. I'll look it up.
Krematorsk? Oh, okay.
I'll tell you. But anyway, there's a region, crime. No,
Krematorsk, I think. Was it Krematorsk where the railroad station was bombed? The Tochka missiles?
nah, doggone it. I didn't have my coffee yet.
Yeah.
It's a region in the Ukraine and Lugansk. There's a region in Lugansk. Starts with a K. Krimskaya, I think it is. Somebody's going to tell me. Anyway, that region was occupied by the Ukraine by the Ukrainian military for 8 years after 2014, and after February they were pushed out by the Lugansk People's Militia and the Russian soldiers, and we talked to folks there, and there was a few elderly women that I was talking to, and they were talking about how all of the Ukrainian military they weren't all Nazis, but the people who were directing them were the Nazis. And they said we saw the patches, and we saw how it was interesting how they would humiliate the soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers, to try to whip them into becoming fascists as well. But they all said that these were the people that were leading these forces. It's the fascist forces that were leading the military, and in fact, they are official parts of the military, right sector, and other regiments, and they're growing in influence as well, political and other influence. You'd mentioned that the socialists are not allowed to exist in the Ukraine now, and that's true. The socialist parties, the people who were helping us with this with the trip, were from Borotba, which
struggle. Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
yeah, which also means struggle. And they were actually trying to create a political party in the parliament in the Ukraine, and they were in the process of doing that until 2014 when the coup happened. And then instead of being politicians and things, now they were being hunted down, and many of them had to leave to protect themselves and their families. And one of who was translating for us went to actually Crimea and then came back to Lugansk. But those were they can tell you that this is really a horrible problem, this fascist growth. In fact, when I first got to Lugansk, one thing that I was part of this conference is a religious conference of top religious leaders, the muftis of the Muslim religion or the Orthodox, the the church, the Greek Orthodox Church. So many religious leaders in the region, and some in even Ukraine. And the main topic of discussion was the problem of the neo-Nazi forces, the ideology of Nazism growing in Ukraine. So they all saw this as a big problem. So when people in here are echoing what the State Department and the Pentagon are saying about there really is no Nazi problem, or that I've even heard folks saying that it's a cartoonish view. Well, it's not a cartoon; it's real, and we saw it. We saw evidence of it on the walls, the places where the Ukrainian military had left. Swastikas, the symbol of the black sun. I saw on a wall, and I saw there's a football team, soccer, they call it football, but there's a soccer team that I think the name Right Sector came from, and they're plastered all over the walls as well. So these are forces that were there, and they were being pushed back by these cooperation between the Lugansk People's Militia and Russia. And, thank goodness, because some of the stories are horrific of what they were doing, over there. So it's, yes.
Right. I heard that Mariupol overwhelmingly voted to join the Donetsk People's Republic in 2014, 2015, but the Azov Battalion occupied it and wouldn't let them, and terrorized the population for 8 years. They held human hostages and stuff like that. Yeah, also people are saying that, in situation in Ukraine with the Nazis could end up like Afghanistan. The jihadis that the U.S. supported then started terrorizing all over the Middle East. We could be in for a situation like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just on that point, it's interesting how the U.S. creates terrorists.
Right.
They do that in. I'm putting my plug in. Sorry.
Okay.
I see my battery is dying, and I should have done this
Yeah.
before. But
checking mine here.
the United Nations has talked about, because now as they're prosecuting this war in Ukraine, they're also, as we're not looking, they're prosecuting a war, increasing the troops in Somalia. Biden is doing. In fact, when the Russians intervened in February in Ukraine, the same day, I believe the United States was bombing and killed civilians in Somalia. So now Biden is calling for more troops there, and the United Nations had said about last year as a report talking about how the U.S. involvement in anti-terrorism in Africa is actually creating terrorists. And so we saw that in Afghanistan with not Bill Clinton, with Carter, who's supposed to be, Mr. Peace and things like that. But, he started this war in Afghanistan. Actually, 10 years before the Soviets even intervened in Afghanistan, the U.S. was putting millions and millions of dollars into supporting the Civil War that was occurring there by giving money to the Mujahideen, who became the Taliban. But we saw the rise of ISIS and Al Qaeda, ISIS in Iraq, Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, as a result of the U.S. Supporting these forces. And so terrorism it seems to come from NATO wars and terrorism and terrorists, and they're making these new forces are like the Al Qaeda forces that are growing up in Ukraine now. In fact, I think it's about 17,000 white supremacist fascist forces from around the world have gone into the Ukraine and gotten military training and then come back and use it. And we saw that person who shot in Buffalo using the same symbol, the black sun, that he was inspired by this person in New Zealand who had contact with the Azov Battalion in Ukraine. Yeah. So, and the Azov Battalion, they have a military wing and they also have a social media wing. So they're getting their message out there. and it's very dangerous. And up to now, it's almost about $100 billion that the U.S. has spent since 2004 on supporting this effort in Ukraine, and a lot of that money and training is going to these fascist forces.
Right, right, right. How do you see the situation ending? Will it end soon? Will it go on? Will it expand? There seem to be mixed signals from the Biden administration. One way, Biden is kind of throwing Zelensky under the bus, saying he didn't listen to our intelligence reports. Other signals that they want to expand. There's a situation in tension between Lithuania. They're cutting off truck routes to Kaliningrad, and also the Taiwan situation is heating up. How would you see this thing playing out in the near future?
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree. Both the folks over there and over here agree this is going to be a long, drawn out war. And one of the reasons it's long though is the opposite of what they're saying in terms of the targeting of civilians by the Russians. The Pentagon, the Pentagon analysts came out in I think it was January. No, it wasn't January. It was 24 days after the start of the conflict in February. 24 days afterwards, Pentagon analysts were anonymously whistleblowers and interviewed by Newsweek, and they were upset about the war escalating so fast, and they were worried that it's gonna escalate into World War III, and so they were currently working for the Pentagon, and they're saying that the fact of the matter of those 24 days, the Russians were not targeting civilians at all. They were, and if you compare it, Newsweek even said if you compared those 24 days of the Russian bombings and sorties to the U.S. attack in Iraq, they were less. Those 24 days of the Russian bombings were less than 1 day of the U.S. attack on Iraq. So, the U.S. knows how to target civilians, but that is one of the reasons why it could have been a lot faster if they decided to prosecute a war the way the United States prosecutes wars. The U.S. is the country that dropped atomic bombs on 2 cities and killed 80,000 people instantly in Nagasaki and Hiroshima alone. So that's one of the things. And the other thing too was funny. I was talking to some of the Russian soldiers, and they were saying, they send these javelins and all these weapons and stuff, but a lot of it just comes to us.
Right.
Because they get intercepted and it comes to us, or else they're being sold someplace else and things like that. That's another thing, and it's hard to know what to believe because the U.S. is constantly passing on the propaganda that they're winning, they're defeating the Russians, but over there it's not what they're seeing. So it's gonna be a long, drawn-out war, but hopefully the anti-war movement can get itself together and understand that this is really about NATO expansion, which has expanded in the last 20 years. It's doubled in the last 20 years, and it's doubled encircling Russia, and having Ukraine as a nuclear power and a NATO member with a military led by fascists is just it's a matter of self-defense for Russia. So if you want this war to stop, then we have to stop the United States from continuing this war, stop sending the weapons, stop sending the billions of dollars, concentrate on COVID and the things that we need here, concentrate on the inflation rate that's the highest it's been for 40 years, and the food problems it's going to cause, and the housing problems, like you said, on Skid Row here in LA. All these problems are being exacerbated, and the U.S. is spending its money for NATO expansion, which threatens World War III. So if we want this to stop, we have to build this anti-war movement here and focus on what needs to be focused on, and that is to tell Biden, stop your war, not only here in Somalia, everywhere else, but stop this genocide that's about to occur.
Right. I hope a major anti-war movement develops in the U.S. in the near future to head this off. I don't want to keep you too long. Just one more question. How would you see? We need to break from the duopoly, Democratic Republican duopoly. How do you see how do you see the way forward as far as building a third party? And what do you think? I'm familiar with the People's Party, Nick Barana. What would be your take on that?
Yeah. Well, I think in some ways it would be we have so much in common. The working class forces here and their allies here. We have so much in common. There's so many oppressed peoples and groupings, sectors of our working class, the LGBTQ, um, Black, African, Latin American. There's so many different oppressed sectors of our class that would benefit from solidarity and unity. Um, in an instant, they'd benefit from it if we could bring it about. And it's interesting. I saw this article. It was an interview by the financial of what's her name, Hillary Clinton, by the Financial Times, and where she was talking about the pathway for the Democratic Party has to be to forget about all these activist things, forget about all these, dealing with these oppressions, and especially don't deal with the transgender issue. Don't deal with the issue of the cops and killing Black people. Don't deal with those issues. Those go in a more right direction rather than a left direction for the Democratic Party. And what she's really saying is stop the solidarity. She's trying to discourage solidarity, and that's what the ruling class is really doing, and that's their main tool, and that's our main weapon, is solidarity. So if we could do that, if we could have empathy and solidarity and allow the leadership of struggles. If you're an oppressed grouping and you have a specific type of oppression, then you should kind of be in the leadership of planning out how to fight against that oppression, and the rest of the community should be in solidarity with that. So, with that kind of a model and fighting together, we could do a lot of things. We could have a third party, but the elections, the elections are mainly. We kind of use them as a barometer, and it's also a way it's a way you can get the message out to a whole lot of people. But it's really going to take the movement in the streets, and it's really going to take the movement. Like, for example, in 2006, when the immigrant community got together to fight against this Sensenbrenner bill, that was a really anti-immigrant racist bill. It was horrible, but they didn't lobby politicians. They didn't vote or anything like that. They just took one day of work and they took it off. They withheld their labor for one day. In Los Angeles, it was like a million people that didn't go to work, and it was happening nationally. So corporations lost billions of dollars in one day, and that bill just disappeared after those demonstrations, and on May 1st, 2006, the bills just disappeared. You didn't see them again, and they didn't have to lobby. But it shows the power we have as workers, and if we can build that kind of a movement in unity and in solidarity with each other's struggles. There's many, like your show, I think it's, what's the name of your show? It's
we are many, they are few.
That's it. That's the whole key right there.
A Shelley poem. Yeah, interesting. Well, I can't think of anything else, and I thank you for spending your time. Was there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I guess not. Thanks for having me on the program, and thanks for having this program and getting the truth out to people. And just, folks, stay true to the truth and be principled, and we're going to win this struggle. And and you can get the other information from, like I said, strugglelalucha.org is our publication. There's lots of great publications. There's lots of groups out there. One of the things that revolutionaries always say, you got to join an organization. So if folks feel inspired, I'd love folks to join the Socialist Unity Party, but there are a lot of other organizations out there that may fit better. But join an organization and get in the struggle, and let's stop this rush to World War III.
Right, sure, cool, thanks. So I'll provide links to La Lucha and to your talk with Margaret Kimberly. I'll post links to it. And I want to thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.